Hey everyone, welcome to David in History for the Ages here. So it's just about 11 o'clock. Hopefully people are going to kind of come in, and this should be a fun question and answer with a lot going on right now. So first of all, a lot of new people here. I just cracked 35,000 subscribers. There's like 4,000 new people in the last week. So welcome to everybody who's new, who's either watching now or in the past. Just a quick little thing about me. I'm a history professor. I teach history at a community college. When I was 18 years old, I was telling my history professor at a community college, I really like this stuff. I want to teach history. I've been doing that since I was 24 years old. And so I kind of put all my lectures over on YouTube for my students when COVID hit, and it just started to take off. And I love teaching. I am a one-man show. It's just me doing this. You can see in my house here in the bedroom, and it's just whenever I have a little bit of time, I try to make some new videos. I don't get a chance to do these question and answers very often, so I'm always excited to do that. And I hope, several people tune in and ask good questions, and we could discuss a lot of what's going on. Always grateful for any support people can give to my channel. I do have a Patreon page that I'm going to just kind of drop here in the chat. One-time thanks, anything, it all helps. I'm, like I said, it's just me. I have a full-time job, family. And so it's kind of fun just to be able to spread these lectures. But of course, getting something out of it is always helpful. I love doing this stuff. I want to show you this as well. This is so cool. Look, this is one of my students made this for me with a 3D printer. So he knew about my channel, of course, being in my class, and he made this. And I thought, this is so cool. It's like really, really neat. So I'll be looking in the chat for questions. I put a poll up, right, on what you guys wanted me to focus on. And so, yeah, I understand people are going to come in and out here. So if you have any questions, stick them in there. Right now, the first thing people are interested in is how history impacts us today, but also, of course, the dangers of comparing everybody to, Nazis. And, I actually have a video on that. And I think with everything going on right now, that is a good place to start. I have my videos that I just made that are super popular. The one on the political spectrum, and it's not so much left and right as much as, one side limited government, and then you go to the other side and you eventually get to communism and socialism and fascism and Nazism and all those on the far end where you have a lot more control. And so I do see this term just thrown around so much. I have a video I made a while back about this and the danger of comparing, people to Nazis when they're not, right? I tell my students, the Nazis, they put human beings in gas chambers. They rounded up people by the millions to massacre them. And when you use that word just willy-nilly because you don't like somebody's political opinions or you don't like their point of view of things, it does so many things. It obviously diminishes the Holocaust. It makes so what's a Nazi? If it's just somebody I don't agree with their political opinion, they're a Nazi. So how bad could the Nazis be? Or on the other side, which is so much more frightening and worse, is that it definitely can trigger people to believe, hey, if this person's Hitler, then, it must be justified to do something horrible to them. And with the absolute horror we saw with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and, I'll be the first to say, do I agree with everything the guy says? No. Who agrees with everything anybody says? But the idea of assassinating somebody for that is just insanely dangerous to our society. So those comparisons are really important to be aware of. And so I know somebody already put that in the chat as a question, so I'm happy to address it. In terms of the other topics we could talk about, really anything you guys want today. We'll kind of go as long as you guys put in questions. So please do things, add questions. So one of the things is people want to know about how history impacts us today. So this is one of my favorite things I cover with all my students every semester, because I get this all the time. Oh, this stuff happened thousands of years ago. Do we really care? So many things that happened thousands of years ago impact who we are today. I mean, you talk about the ancient Hebrews, and you get the monotheistic religion. I mean, you don't get Christianity without that. And you think of all the people who follow those monotheistic religions today, that doesn't happen without the Jewish culture and the history of the Jewish people, something I also cover a lot of on my channel. I have a lot of videos on that. The Jewish holidays are coming up. I have a great 5-minute video that talks about all the Jewish holidays in 5 minutes. But yes, definitely. And then you get into other civilizations like the Greeks. Right now I'm covering the Greeks in my class. And literally in my video, a lot of people got, oh, David doesn't know what he's talking about. Anarchy doesn't mean no rules. It means no government. And, of course, I use the word anarchy, meaning no rules, in the sense that's how we usually think of it. But the real origins of the word anarchy comes from the ancient Greeks, where there was a period of time of archons, and then there were no archons, specifically in Athens, and archon and no archons, and archon and anarchy. That's where the word comes from. So technically, yeah, it means there's no rulers, but people understand it, I think, in our language today as meaning, really no rule of law. So in so many other things we get from the Greeks, a lot of words like draconian. I was just lecturing on that. The word Draco, who created harsh laws, and so we use the word draconian, or Pyrrhic victory. So we get so many words we use in our English language from the Greeks. You go on to look at so many other elements of our lives, from the Romans to the Middle Ages, and it does impact who we are, right? I mean, even the English language we use today. How do we get the English language we use today? It's basically a mixture, in large part created as a result of the Norman conquest of England. When the Normans, conquered the Anglo-Saxons and they merged together, eventually that mishmash helped to create English. And so, yes, we definitely get things from a lot of different civilizations to our world today. But please put questions in the comments, in the chat here. Let me put my glasses on, see if anybody's got anything they'd really want me to talk about. That'd be great here. I don't see anything yet. So yeah, put some questions in so we can kind of talk about the various things, whatever you really want to discuss. It could be about ancient history, it could be about Israel, it could be, obviously I have a lot of material on that. So the more questions, the better. So in terms of, other things that, since we're still, let's see what's on the poll here. Yeah, the Nazi comparison, we already kind of talked about that a bit. And so the political spectrum video, so, that's an interesting topic, because, if you hadn't had a chance to see it yet, and really the other video I shared, the 2-minute one, which is really fascinating, because this is an experiment I do with my students every semester. Show them a picture of the swastika, or first of all, the Soviet symbol, and they get words like, communism or control. And then I show them the swastika, and I get words like evil and monstrous and all of those things. And the thing I didn't get into in that video is why. Why is it that people see the Nazis worse than the communists, right? Because obviously they're both ideologies that created so much pain and suffering and havoc. Why is it? Well, I think one reason is World War II, because during World War II, who did we side with? We sided with Stalin. And, Churchill had a great line about this, because, obviously Churchill didn't like the Soviets at all and the communists. And, people said, you're aligned with Hitler. And Churchill said, if Hitler invaded hell, I'd have a few nice things to say about the devil. I'm paraphrasing there. But so I think because of that, that's one reason that people have not seen communism as quite a bad light as Nazism. Obviously, I think the Holocaust is something that people are familiar with much more than things like the gulags, right? I mean, if you think of how many people Stalin murdered, Mao murdered in their camps, they were, just as brutal as what happened during the Holocaust. And of course, I say this as, somebody who says you don't throw around those words, right? But those are people who did actually, literally round up people and work them to death or kill them. So definitely, I do think there's that difference. So I think a lot of it's World War II. I think a lot of it is just our educational system. One of my videos that I made is, not everybody needs to go to college. And I say this as a college history professor, and why there's so much anti-Semitism in college. And unfortunately, I think in the last 20, 30 years, especially, education has moved away too much from, education, and it's become more agenda driven, and that's never healthy. And I think that's part of the problem as well. So I see a bunch of comments here. I can't read them without my glasses, so let me put them on. So what do you think of those online celebrating the murder? That is just something that obviously I hope these are just fake people and bots, is what I say. But sadly, I'm sure there are some people we've all met in person who do celebrate this. And I think that's just a real sign of how diseased our society is. And look, folks, if it was somebody of the political left who was assassinated and like this, and people on the right were celebrating, I would say the same thing. It is not okay. And, I'll be very direct. I mean, obviously, the vitriol, the rhetoric has been horrible. I do objectively think it is worse from more the far left than what we would think of as conservatives, but I don't think we can give anybody a pass. I mean, even President Trump in his time in office has used terms and words that I don't think were helpful to our society, even if you do agree with his ideas. And so I do think everybody needs to work on our rhetoric, how we communicate with people. And the such tragic thing at Charlie Kirk is he did do that. He did talk in a kind way with people he disagreed. He opened the door for let's discuss this if you don't agree with me. And he never, he wasn't one of these kind of guys who just kind of use this horrible language towards people. So it's just horrible to see that. So yeah, that's a good question. Do you think the Israeli attacks oh, okay, this is a good question. So about the Middle East. So Israel attacking Hamas leaders in Qatar. Yeah, so I thought about that a bit because obviously people were like, "What is Israel going into Qatar and attacking people, Hamas there?" And I think the question is, why is Qatar hiding Hamas? Right? I think that's just as important question. And to that end, I remind people this is just right after 9/11. Where did we find bin Laden? We literally went into Pakistan to take out bin Laden. So I think it's a lot of hypocrisy for people to complain, oh, Israel's gone into Qatar to take out Hamas when, Israel's job is to stop Hamas. So something like 10/7 won't happen again. Do I think there are going to be global implications on this and people are going to say, oh, there goes Israel again? Yeah, but, when the Munich massacre took place, another video I have on the Olympics, if you're not familiar with that, and there's a movie called Munich about it, and the Mossad went through and they found the people who perpetuated that horrific act during the Olympics, and they found them. And I think if you don't do that and you just sit idly by, you can't let these things sit. So to that question, yeah, I do think it was something that Israel probably did need to do. And I think it's also a sign to other nations, hey, if you're going to harbor groups that want to commit acts like 10/7, you're going to be possibly, found in those countries. And would have Hamas agreed to Trump's ceasefire? I don't think so. I mean, Hamas, the goal of Hamas, and I've been teaching this for so long, and this is the sad tragedy of it, because as you see people in Gaza dying and so forth, who was happy about people in Gaza dying the most? Hamas, right? And it is because they live off of that death. And their only concern is staying around and staying in power. And so they live off of it. They use their own people as human shields. And so, when people talk about, whatever it is, the problems in Gaza, I have a video on that. And, my philosophy is, do I think Israel should govern Gaza? Absolutely not. I don't think that's the role of Israel to govern Gaza. But I also, at the same time, I just don't think it'd be practical. And also, I don't know how Israel would do it. But at the same time, should they leave until all the hostages are free? Of course not. Should they make sure Hamas is gone? Yeah. And, where are the other Arab nations? Where are they not stepping up to deal with this? And that's, I think, an important point as well. And again, I definitely have videos on that also. Let's see, what other questions? Oh, there's some questions in language I didn't read. Do you think the words communism and socialism are overused? That's a fair question too, right? Because people say, we use the word fascism and Nazism too much. Do we overuse communism and socialism? So first of all, how do we distinguish between communism and socialism? I think that's an important point, because if you look at the ideologies of both, they're similar in the sense that, they're both about the economics element. The government owns the means of production, redistribution of wealth. When I was a student many years ago, one of my professors said the difference between communism and socialism is communism is forced upon you at the point of a gun, in the sense that it's a very kind of military, and you've got the gulags, and it's not people choosing it and so forth. So I'm very hesitant when people throw around the word communism. I have the same reaction, because just like my video explains, if we're going to say communism and Nazism are basically the same, then folks throwing around the word communism all the time is also, I think, dangerous, if we're going to be honest and consistent. Now, if you're rounding up people, if you want to shut down businesses and all private ownership and all of that, then there's you can maybe say somebody has like economic leanings towards communism. We could be more nuanced. Socialism. I think somebody was asking about the New York mayor guy. I think socialism is very fair. I mean, they describe themselves as socialism. Bernie Sanders described himself as socialism. And so, absolutely, I think those labels are perfectly apt for that. And I think people also need to understand what is socialism. Ah, there's a I need to do another video. Just what is socialism? I cover it in my like 19th century ideology video. But yeah, I mean, the socialism is an idea that appeals to a lot of people. But I think the biggest because they don't understand human nature well, right? The whole concept is, we redistribute wealth, we give everything to everybody, and in theory is like, all right, everybody's fine. But what ends up happening, I use this as an example of my students when they have their exams, like, okay, we're going to make my exam socialist. And we're going to add up all the grades and I'm going to average them out. So A's and B's and C's and D's, I'm going to get an average, and that's what everybody in the class gets. And if I do that, obviously the A students aren't going to be too happy. Students who failed are going to be gleeful, right? Oh, I failed, but I still get a C because the A people pulled me up. The problem, of course, the A people are going to stop working after a while. And if they stop working after a while, there's nobody left to be able to pull the load. I heard this expression before. I forgot who said it. I apologize. But there's a point where you get too many people sitting in the cart and not enough people pulling the cart, and then the system breaks. And so I think it's just human nature that will never make socialism work in a pure form. Do I think there's room for safety nets in a society where government does help people in some way, shape, or form? Yeah, because you can't go to the opposite spectrum and go, let's just do complete laissez-faire, right? We tried that in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You had 5-year-olds working in the coal mine, and so I don't think pure laissez-faire is the answer. And it's just a matter of a pendulum. And I think what happens historically is the pendulum swings. We go from one end and people go, wow, we have way too much of this government stuff. And then we swing back and we need more. I definitely think we've swung too far, in my opinion. And, I tend to just kind of give facts and ideas more than my opinion. But my personal opinion, I think we have gone too far in the idea of how many things the government does run in our lives. I mean, sometimes I ask my students this, and this would be a good question for everybody. Think of something in our lives today, and I'm talking in the United States of America or Europe even, that the government is not somewhat involved in. It's something. Education involved in. If you want to start a business, government involved in. If you want to, do some repair work to your house or something, you got to get a government not contract, forget the word, approval. I forget the exact word for it. I mean, what is it that with the food we eat, government, right? And so pretty much everything is somewhat the big hand of government is involved in. And again, I'm not going to advocate getting rid of all of it, but I do think at point we have too much of it. So that's a really good question. Yeah, of course, the hostages. God, if that's the other thing about that. How do you end all this? Release the hostages. Problem solved. And I mean, I think that's something really important too. Definitely going to do more questions here, but something else I'm wearing my shirt. I also wanted to remind people, yeah, of course, I love any contributions, people joining my Patreon page. But two other things I want to remind everybody of. I offer unit studies to students, homeschoolers. A lot of homeschoolers watch my stuff. So if you need any unit studies, if you're any of that group, please, that helps support my work a lot. And I do have these shirts I sell too. That's something new. I don't have too many of them, but if anybody wants one of those shirts, you can shoot me off an email, and I don't have like a big website or anything. Like I said, it's just me. Same thing. I do have a teachers paying teacher site for my unit studies, but you can always contact me directly. You get it a lot cheaper than buying it off that. So just a couple things I wanted to throw out there and let the people know as well. Let's see. What else? Ludwig von Mises. I honestly don't know very much about him. I'd have to look that up. One of the cool things about doing this, and especially my last videos, I've been teaching history for 29 years, still learn new things. And so I'll have to look that one up a bit. Celebration. I witnessed a friend from high school celebrating. It's a very 1984 moment. Yeah, again, that comment about people celebrating. I think 1984 is such an apt description of it, right? Then that's a novel I assign every single semester in my modern Western Civ class. I assign 1984 to my students, and one of the things that I talk about is this 2 minutes of hate that is done in the novel, and how people are taught to hate so much and to celebrate death and of innocence. And that is just, again, it's a sign. One of the other videos I put out, so it's kind of picking up some steam, is why empires fall. And when you start to see that element of civilization, when you start to see political assassinations, and this was a political assassination, I think you can argue fairly that it's hard to think of a political assassination bigger than this. Then you'd have to go back to MLK or JFK. And if you think of ancient Rome, just to give you parallels, we talked about how history impacts us today and how we can learn from history. There was a point where the Roman Republic was flourishing. They were doing well. They were at its peak. And then you start to see a decline. And one of the first things that gave it away early in the fall of the Roman Republic was the political assassinations of these two brothers, the Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. And, I've lectured my students on this, and I tell them, these were points. They had other political views on how to distribute land and inside of Rome, and people didn't agree with them, and they were killed. One, and then 10 years later, the other. And I say that's, it's like the tip of the iceberg, because, as you go through the timeline, 100 years later, Rome's in full out civil war. And you have primary sources from Romans, whether it's Sallust or Cicero and others, that talk about, hey, there's corruption in our politics. There's, you rise to power through backstabbing. The political assassination of Charlie Kirk was not just an assassination of him. It is assassination of free thought and free ideas. In France, was it France? No, it wasn't France. I'm sorry. Years ago, there was an author, a cartoonist who was assassinated. I think his name was Charlie. Charlie was not France. I think maybe Denmark. Not exactly sure. I apologize. But definitely, when you start to see that, it suffocates thoughts and ideas. And what is the core of the United States? That freedom of speech. And when that is threatened, that fears people. And I give a lot of credit to people. I heard Ben Shapiro the other day say, you know what, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep going, because if you give into those things, then you're done. And we all remember after 9/11, what do we do? What do we do? Oh, thank you. Somebody put it in the chat. Charlie Hebdo. Was he from France? Thank you, Tamara. That was the name. Yeah. It was I think he did a political cartoon, and people didn't like it. He was assassinated. And yeah, I remember that story. That must have been more than 10 years ago now. So definitely. Let's see. By the way, there's a new movie out for the Munich Olympics called September 5th. Oh, okay. I didn't know there was a new movie. I know there was Steven Spielberg did a movie called Munich. That was at least 10, 15 years ago. So it's good to know there's another one there. 2 minutes of hate. Yeah, absolutely. What political era would you say are we in now? The U.S. has been through political eras such as the third party system, the populist. You know what? We are very polarized now. So I think to put us in one bowl is hard. I show my students the electoral college map of 1984 when Reagan won 49 states. And I'm like, we were really united then. And did everyone like Reagan? No, but we were. So I think to say we're a populist or we're more of a socialist or what is very hard, because we are so divided and fragmented, right? I mean, we're not like one person's got 80% approval, and we're never that high, but it's still very polarized. I definitely think we have a new populist trend. I mean, look, President Trump is not like Reagan. One of the things about political parties is they change. I mean, if JFK were to look at the Democratic Party today, he'd be like, what happened, right? I mean, it's not the same party. And definitely, I think Trump has more of that populist movement towards him as well. We've seen that before in other presidents in the past, so that's not new. So I think it's hard to qualify it as what we are, just because we're so polarized. But it's a great, great question. I love all these questions. Thank you. Do we think there'll be a Jewish president in the United States? It's I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. I mean, first of all, there aren't that many Jewish people, right? There's like 0.2% of the entire population. So from sheer numbers, we don't have that many of them. They had Joseph Lieberman. I remember years ago, he was, running as VP, and he was like one of these moderate Democrats. I think we need more people like Joe Lieberman, who was around years ago. I'd be curious to see. I think there would be pretty much acceptance in the United States. Obviously, some people wouldn't like that idea, but look, we had a long time with no Catholic president, and then we had John F. Kennedy. So I do think it's a possibility. I just can't think of anybody off my top of my head from either political party who's. I mean, there's not Ben Shapiro. Shapiro from Pennsylvania, the governor of Pennsylvania, Democrat. But again, I don't know. I don't see a big name kind of who can maybe do that right away. Let's see. Let me scroll up. So many good questions here. I'm loving it. I saw someone call it the shot that killed the moderate right. Yeah, and one thing I hope doesn't happen is that, and this is what I will say. What have we not seen since the Charlie Cook assassination? No riots, no burning, no looting. We have seen vigils. We've seen people pray. We've seen people come together. And so what I hope doesn't happen is like a counteraction where people go, oh, this person is, somebody to the left. Now I want to harm them. And that would be just horrible. But so I do think we need some element of moderation from everybody, but at the same time, hold those core values that we want to care about our fellow man, and find best ways to heal our nation, but still hold your values. Absolutely. I do think, the voices will resonate more now, and people may have been quiet about some political things in the past, might be more vocal. So I do think that's definitely true. I can't hear you. Yeah, just got okay. Let me see. I'm going through some of the questions here. Debating with a French person who claims that this is a sign the U.S. eventually balkanizing. That's interesting, because if there was going to be balkanizing, yes, Ukraine. I'll get to Ukraine in a second. But balkanizing, if anybody's going to balkanize, and it's funny you had that conversation with somebody from France, because my God, that's where I think it's going to happen. When you look at England and France and the demographics there and the different languages, I think that's a more dangerous place to balkanize than the United States. I mean, the United States, we kind of have two. And yeah, we have definitely those tense moments, but I think Europe is probably much more in danger of balkanizing. And for those of you who don't know that term, balkanization, it refers back to, the area of Yugoslavia, 1990s, where, it all fell apart. And you had so many different, I cover this in my history of the Middle East class. You had so many different ethnicities and background and people, and they were basically all separated because they couldn't keep together. And, this is one thing I talk about when I talk about the fall of Rome. And when the Roman Empire fell, it didn't just fall because the Germanic tribes just invaded and conquered. It happened over a long time where the Romans lost their traditions, their customs, their language. And so, some people know this, some don't. I'm an immigrant, and, I'm a very proud immigrant. And I think immigration is great. I tell my students this all the time. I think immigration has helped make the United States an amazing nation. But if you immigrate to the United States, you have to assimilate. And what I mean by that, it doesn't mean you give up your entire culture and language and customs, but you need to learn the English language. You got to say, this document of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, I believe in, and I hold to those views of those Bill of Rights and so much. Because if you lose that, then you're in trouble. So I do think there is a responsibility that anyone who's an immigrant does actually, assimilate to some degree into the country. So I think that's something that's really important as well. So yeah, definitely. So that's kind of interesting coming from somebody from France. So there's one on Ukraine. I do have a video on Ukraine, Russia. So I do have a video on the history of Ukraine and Russia. So it hasn't really gotten a lot of traction, but it's there. With all this that's going on, some people have missed. Poland. And there's a lot of now tension because I guess there were some drones flying into Poland. And then again, this goes back to World War II and NATO and the creation of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Why was that all created? It was created so Russia would not be invaded places like Poland. And so if we start to see that, I don't think my hunches is Putin is not going to go there because that's going to be that bridge. If he crosses into that, I think European nations are probably going to have to step up, and actually you'll see a massive pushback militarily, where you'll see actually military nations outside Ukraine fighting against Russia. So I don't see him doing that, but you never know. I think the moderate right and moderate left are beginning to unite more. I will say this: I work on a college campus, and it's no secret college campuses are more left, but and I am at a community college too, and in a more not quite as a super radical area. And I will say I have had good conversations with my colleagues who are not conservative, and they are completely angered of what happened to Charlie Kirk. And I will say there have been a lot of people who, Democrats as well, to their credit, who have come up and stepped up and said, this was a pure act of evil. And so they're his. And I do think there is a place where a lot of times I find with my colleagues, it's like we have the same goals. We want our students to succeed. We want everybody to do well. But we just have different views on how to get there a lot. And it's like one of the things that comes up a lot in our courses is in our colleges, this thing called grading for equity, and how we want to elevate our students who are minorities and then don't do as well. And, the college approach and a lot of colleges, well, we do these things like, letting students turn in things late for any reasons because they have more problems in life and all that. And my approach is like, that doesn't help you. I'm not going to be there to help you fight, but you're going to have to empower yourself. And so I think sometimes there's just different approaches to help people. And so I think there is a place where I definitely think there's a lot of 80-20 issues where most people agree with. It's like, almost nobody I know, actually nobody I personally know, hates gay people and says, I don't want gay people to be able to live or exist or any of that or round them up. Now, folks, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, you'd find a lot of that. Let's be honest. What I see today is 80% of the people I know, you practice, do whatever you want to do. We don't care, live your life, whatever consenting adults do in the privacy of their home, none of our business. But you know what 80% of the people also believe? If you're a biological male, you don't compete against females. And I think there's a lot of those areas where people probably are more in agreement on than they're not. So, that's just kind of my 2 cents there. All right. Let's see. What other questions? Why do you think so many people are pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel? So I think, it's not so many people. When you look at polls in the United States, at least, most polls, 70, 80% are more pro-Israel. I think what you see is very loud people on the other side. And that loud voice is usually what people see and they hear. And so I think that kind of is part of it. I do think a lot of it, and I do have a very important video on this, why in the United States, the only, in my city that I live in, I haven't seen any anti-Semitism. Where have I seen a little bit of it? On my college campus. And I think there is a problem on colleges. It's a long video. It's about a 10-minute video. But folks, I break it down point by point by point, why colleges have seen a rise of anti-Semitism. And, a lot of it is ignorance of education. A lot of it is this intersectionality that we see from people. And so I don't think it's actually, I think probably more people are pro-Israel in the sense that Israel is a democratic nation. I think people who understand the history, understand that, if Israel, this whole blood libel, if Israel's committing genocide. I mean, if Israel, that's another word we throw around like Nazi genocide. The population of the people in Gaza has gone up. That's not how genocides work, folks, right? If Israel wanted to wipe out everybody in Gaza, they could have done it October 8th. They don't want to do that. People who commit genocide don't warn the other side, hey, we're gonna attack this building, get out, right? And so I think a lot of it is just the rhetoric that's so falsely taught, and then the internet. I mean, my God, the internet is it's like any other technology. It could be used for good or for bad, and unfortunately, so many stuff is just circulated, and young people see it, and they don't take the time to read things. They see a 10-second TikTok. I tell my students all the time, you can't learn the history of the Middle East with a 10-second TikTok. You really do have to you know, study it in depth and know the long history. All right, so let me see a few more questions here. Now we're enough to know what's happening in Western Europe. I'm looking to increase the violence and hatred among the youth. It's about the old ways. Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot going on in Europe there as well. All right, so I don't know if I missed any of the questions here. I'm scrolling back up here. There's so many good ones here. I think I hit all the questions there. So yeah, those are some of the things going on. I mean, there's so much more we could obviously talk about in terms of history. I love ancient Rome and Greece and all of that. So I know right now a lot of the stuff on my channel has been the political stuff and all that, what's going on, but the Middle Ages, learning about the Franks, learning about the Punic Wars and that happened that gripped Rome. All those things I think are really enjoyable as well. And I have done other live videos as well on all sorts of things like how geography impacted history. That's a cool one. So they have all sorts of other lives that you could watch, movies. Definitely another thing I suggest to people as they watch this is, a good way to learn history, how to make history fun for people. That's always a topic I like to mention. And, I think movies are great. I think historical movies, even when they're inaccurate, are a good way to learn history because you go and watch the history. I don't know if any of you saw the last Gladiator movie, and he had sharks in the Colosseum and all of that. And of course, that was all nonsense. They never had sharks in the Colosseum, but they did flood the Colosseum, right? And so, you could learn a lot by then taking the movie, exploring the history, reading the primary sources, and trying to paint a picture of what really happened. And so, some of these movies are better. Obviously, when Christopher Nolan makes a movie, it's pretty good. Oppenheimer was great. Dunkirk was great. He's going to do The Odyssey. I'm looking forward to that one. Let's see, another question here. Do you have a reading list movies to watch or recommend? Yeah, actually I do. I have a couple videos. I have a video on my favorite novels and books. I have a video on my top. What I have is I have a top 5 playlist. That's a good place to look at those. So if you go to my top 5 playlist, one of the things I tried to do with all my videos is organize them in playlists. So go to the top 5 playlist and you'll see like my top 5 movies, and then I add more, and then the comments are great. That's where I love the comments. And that's the other thing, even if people can't do the thanks and the little chats, contributions and all that, obviously I appreciate all that, the Patreon members, the buying shirts, the unit studies, folks. When you all just simply like, share, leave comments on my videos, all of them, it helps. My last video took off because so many people have left comments and shared it, and it's at like over 125,000 views now. And so that always helps too. So even if you can, whatever you could give, $2 is great from people. You could do a $2 monthly contribution, but just watching, sharing, liking, that all helps. And leaving comments is a big help as well. Which historical events do you think are most relevant to our current events? Historical events most relevant to current events. Wow, I don't know. There's so many things going on. I definitely think, with everything going on in Russia, Ukraine, that's a big one. So understanding some background on the Cold War, understanding, how we got to this point, Putin coming into power, I think that would be helpful. Obviously, everything in the Middle East. So I definitely think if, you have some time, I have a whole playlist on the history of Israel. And if you understand that history, it will help you understand the current events a lot. And you can go all the way back to the ancient history, or you could pick up even from, the modern period. And that itself is something very helpful. So that's a good question. All righty. So Do you think we'd pay more attention to the Myanmar civil war? Yeah, I mean, obviously, people can speak all those things well. It's not an area that I'm a big expert on either, to be honest with you. But there's just so many things going on in the world. That's the other thing that we can't even keep track on. It's crazy. All right, everybody. So, anyways, this has been fun. I wanted to kind of be able to do this and answer some questions and interact with some of you. So, I'm really grateful for everybody who's tuned in. You can obviously keep watching these recording of this later. If you have more questions, put them in the comments. Put comments in all my other videos. I'll be happy to answer them as I get a chance. I'm unfortunately not being able to answer all the questions on some of my videos because it's a good problem. There've been so many. And so, but that I always kind of whenever I have time. I don't have much time. I have maybe most days half hour, an hour a day at the most to do this. So when I do, I'm like, I look at some questions and comments and try to answer them. So I apologize if I can't get to everybody. But like I said, full-time job, family, and all that. So this is just something extra fun. I'm glad I'm able to share my lectures with so many people. We hit 35,000 subscribers. We're well over 1 million views. So keep please sharing my stuff. It'd be great to have more people, a lot of homeschoolers again. Look at my unit studies. They're a great resource. And other than that, I'll just say thank you to everybody. And we're going to sign off here. And definitely leave more questions if you'd like in the comments. All right, everybody. Take care. Be good. Everyone have a great day.